Alrighty. So we're going to continue on today with our study of 1 Peter. Remember I said this is the one that gets you canceled, not the one last week about submitting to slaves and masters. This one is about, now depending on which Bible you read, I noticed the Bible here at the front, it said the duties of husbands and wives. Yep. Which, I don't know if it was a TikTok thing or a YouTube thing, I don't know, but that girl who's doing like the whole 1950s thing and people are just losing their minds, and it's like, if that's not a symptom of something that's happening in our society, I don't know what is, because it seems it's live and let live unless it's something we don't like you doing. And so For one, it doesn't really bother me, but let's just get into the word today. And I want to also remind you, this is a single letter that would have been read all at once, all at one time. So when I say in the very first verse where it pops up here, Rebecca's gonna throw it up for you. It says, "Wives, in the same way, submit yourselves to your own husbands." What he's talking about, what he just finished talking about, if you weren't with us last week, is the way that we ought to submit to government, in the way that slaves ought to submit to masters, in that same fashion, in that same way, wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands, so that if any of them do not believe the word, that they may be won over without words by the behavior of their wives. See, Peter, even then, he was talking about by living a good and virtuous life dedicated to righteousness, to a life dedicated to holiness, that same holiness that Peter called out at the very beginning of his letter. If you're going to live a life like that, then your unbelieving relatives, whether it be, in this case, it's your spouse, right? In this case, it's a wife's husband, bleh. But your unbelieving relatives, by seeing your good and virtuous life, by seeing a life dedicated to holiness, will come to see the glory of God, right? This is how some of them will be won over, as Peter puts it. And he also says the big S word, the big dirty S word that our culture says today. He says submit, right? We need to put ourselves under the authority of, we need to allow ourselves to be under the authority of something other than ourselves, which of course is not a very popular message today, because today you are your own master and you're going to lead your own way and you're basically your own God. And so I heard the strangest thing this morning. I have to share this because I think it's relevant to what's going on here, and I think it's why it's a really great symptom of things that are going wrong with our world, because I didn't even believe this was a real thing until I had to really dig into it. I was like, is this a real thing? They call it I think it's called sologamy. Has anyone ever heard of this? Okay. It's people who get married to themselves. If that's not the ultimate form of narcissism, I don't know what is. It's people who get married to themselves. We have gone, and the Bible warned us about this. We've read about it in Revelation, right? We're going to be seeing people who are completely indulgent in self-love. We're going to see this thing. And the reason I want to say all this is because we've taken the biblical idea of marriage and we've slowly been contorting it over time to twist whatever it is that we want it to say. Instead of looking at the Bible and saying, God, what did you intend? What did you have in mind? What was your design? Now, there's a couple things I want to mention real quick about this. Number one, it says, submit yourself to your own husband, okay? That does not mean submit yourself to men. That means women, submit yourself to husband. If you are not married, then you don't submit yourself to any man. Why? Because you have not made that commitment. That is not a relationship that you're in. This is not the same principle, right? This is about a marriage relationship, and we're going to dive into that a little bit more when we finish off the husband section at the end. And why is it in this particular case, Peter's pointing out the absolute necessity of winning over those that have not yet believe. They don't yet believe that Jesus is the Messiah. They don't yet believe that he is Lord, that he was the Son of God, that he came and paid the debt for their sins. They don't yet believe this. And the other thing that's important to recognize is, who was it that Peter was teaching? Peter was teaching other Jewish people, right? Primarily, that was his audience. Paul was the apostle to the Gentiles, and Peter was apostle to the Jews. And he was going and he was teaching the Jews. And so when he says that they may be won over without words by the behavior of their lives, when they see the purity and the reverence of your lives, both things he referenced back in chapter 1, verse 14 and chapter 2, verse 18, when they see the purity and reverence of your life, he's saying, look, these are people that already believe in God. Your husbands, they're good Jewish men. They know the Torah, they believe in God. They're already halfway there. But when they begin to see that the reverence for God you have increases, when they begin to see the purity of your life increase, when they begin to see how the Holy Spirit shows up and transforms you, then your Jewish husbands at home who already know God are going to be like, there's something to this Jesus guy. They told us it was rebellion, but there's something not quite right, because why is my wife closer to God than she has ever been? Verse 3. And I'm not going to use this as a clobber verse, Rebecca, okay? So don't worry. Your beauty should not come from outward adornment, such as elaborate hairstyles, the wearing of gold jewelry, or fine clothes. And the reason I said that is because I was joking with her earlier this week, and I pulled it out. I was like, Rebecca, it says right here, your beauty does not come. And why is that? And it's important again. It says, rather it should be of your inner self, your unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is of great worth in God's sight. Now, what does that mean? It says your beauty doesn't come from that. Does it say you should not do that? No. Okay, I want to make that clear. If you get dressed up and you look fancy and it's nice, that's fine. Now, single ladies, you have a completely different dilemma here, okay? It's what I like to call the Leah-Rachel dilemma. Don't make yourself look like Rachel so that when your husband wakes up the next day after their wedding, turns out they've actually married Leah, okay? Outward beauty is so unimportant. That's what Peter's getting at here. That the way that you dress yourself, the jewelry you wear that signifies your status, the clothes that you wear, the way that you wear your hair, none of these things matter. They are irrelevant. In fact, maybe you've even had this argument with your husband, wives, where you've said, "Hey, how does this look? How does this look?" And your husband, "I don't know." Rebecca's given up asking me. I think she just talks to her cousin. She pulls up the video chat. "How does this look?" She's like, "Well," and they can talk about it, because I was like, "I don't know." Because guess what? Men don't care. We just don't. Because at the end of the day, the outward adornment, the elaborate hairstyles, the gold jewelry, the fine clothes, all these things, none of this matters. These as the old expression goes, beauty is only skin deep. And in fact, it is what's on the inside that matters. And this is why the very beginning of this was a call, again, to purity and to reverence. Not reverence for a man, but reverence for God, right? Rather, it should be the it should be that of the inner self, the unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which, by the way, what are those two things that we're hearing? We're hearing fruits of the Spirit, once again, manifest. Why? Because it says these are of great worth in God's sight. What are the things that we know are of great worth in God's sight? It's when we allow the fruit of the Spirit to come into our lives. If you're going to live a life of holiness, of purity, of a call to God, if you're going to live a life in pursuit of God and doing the things that God has called you, you're going to see the fruit of the Spirit manifest in your life, and you're going to see that manifest also in your marriage. Your marriage will be healthier. Your marriage will be fruitful. And these are, of course, great things. What do you desire to be valuable to? This is very important, because the way our world goes today, our most important value signifier seems to be ourselves. Instagram. Is that enough said? Do I need to go on? See the men. No. It's true. We say, and Christians are not immune from this. Christians say with our mouths that we believe in God, we trust in God, that God is the one that we're pursuing, that God's the one that we're after, that He's the one whose approval that we seek. And yet, when we live our lives, we're showing a very different side of ourselves. It's something that we have to be constantly vigilant over, that we constantly keep in check and look over, make sure that we're not falling into this narcissism trap. Verse 5, for this way the holy women of the past who put their hope in God for this is the way the holy women of the past who put their hope in God used to adorn themselves. They submitted themselves to their own husbands. There's that phrase again, own husbands, not men. And I'll make a distinction here in a second. Like Sarah, who obeyed Abraham and called him her Lord, you are her daughters if you do what is right and do not give way to fear. Okay, two things. I'll make a bold statement that isn't popular in church today, but I'm going to say it anyway. I'm not egalitarian, okay? I don't think that men and women play an equal role in a relationship or in society. It's just not true. I believe that we were created for specific roles, that we have strengths and weaknesses, that we have differences. And the reason that we have marriage, and the beauty of the significance of marriage, is it's a reunion of God, of man, of woman, and of God. The three-cord rope being brought back together. Alone we are weak. We are vulnerable. We get married, and we have these unions because it makes us stronger. It makes us whole, and it makes us complete. If we are all equal and we are all the same, then we don't need each other to complete each other. That just means we're all the same amount of brokenness. We don't actually we don't actually fill the other roles that are missing. And we don't recognize the call of God on our life. I want to point out, Peter pointed out Sarah here, which is true. Sarah is a fantastic example. She actually did refer to Abraham as her Lord, even though he was her husband. I want to point out some other examples of just women, noteworthy women that the Bible felt were absolutely paramount to write down, and it's often used in an egalitarian sense to say, see, God uses them, therefore they have the exact same role as men. No, God uses them. Yes, absolutely. There is a role for each and every person, but it's different. I want to point to Ruth first. Why? Because Ruth always holds this esteemed role, right? Why? Because she was an outsider who got brought in and ends up in the line of Christ. The line of kings comes from Ruth. She's an honored woman. And yet, what was Ruth's behavior that we read about in the book of Ruth that made her so special? She submitted to her husband. She honored him and lived a life of purity and holiness, seeking after God and doing his will. Same as Esther. Guess what? Esther, great example. A powerful woman, a queen of one of the largest empires, certainly the largest at that time. And yet, was a wife to a man who hated her people. She was ready to accept the consequences for her actions because she put herself under his authority. Yes, she did brave things. Yes, she spoke out when she needed to. Because guess what? In a husband-wife relationship, those times happen, don't they? Husbands, wives. We have those situations where we have to have those conversations where things aren't necessarily easy. They can get tense, but the point is that it enriches our relationship. Right? A wife like Esther sought the very best for her husband, even though her husband was a non-Jew, a non-Hebrew, to honor God in her reverence to the Lord. she did her very best to make sure that he did not fall into the trap that those around him would lay. Finally, I want to talk about Deborah, because Deborah is obviously the one that people always bring up. They say, see, Deborah led a war. No, she didn't. Barak did. Yes, but she spoke for God. She was a prophetess. Yes, absolutely. She did speak for God. And as a result, Barak still led the troops. Barak was still in control. And yes, because of Barak's unfaithfulness, he eventually did lose the honor of destroy. Was it? I can't remember which king it was. And I'm not going to read it right now. It's right here, but I'm not going to read it. But he did eventually lose the honor to a woman. If you remember, it wasn't Deborah. It was another woman in a tent who drove a tent peg through his head. But that was a lack of faithfulness on his part. That wasn't her asserting her dominance. See, the fact of the matter is that each one of these women, each one of these tremendous women, all had one thing in common. They sought after God with their whole heart. And it meant even in times that were really tricky, like Sarah, where suddenly Sarah is being told by her husband, hey, okay, Sarah, I need you to kind of go with this king for the night. She didn't understand, but she did it. See, it says, you are her daughters, and if you do what is right and do not give way to fear. Why? Because fear is what leads us to disobey so often. And you'll hear this brought up many, many times. They say, well, what about things like abuse? Don't you open yourself up to abuse if you're telling people to submit under their husbands? That's fear. And the reason I want to get to that is because of the next line. The next line is very important. Verse 7 is very important in this discussion. But we can't allow ourselves to give in to fear. And you need to remember, you are daughters of Sarah. Why? Because we've been adopted into whose family? Into the family of Abraham. We inherit his promise. And if you are in the family of Abraham, then that means that, ladies, you're all daughters of Sarah. Use that mother as your example, who the Lord blessed greatly. And it all comes down to this last part. And this is why I say that the idea, the fear of abuse, the fear of all these different things, why they can be such a problem. It says here in verse 7, husbands, in the same way, and by the way, wives, if you're sitting next to your husband, don't elbow him yet. I'll elbow him for you, okay? In the same way, be considerate as you live with your wives, and treat them with respect as the weaker partner, and the heirs with you in the gracious gift of life, so that nothing will hinder your prayers. First thing I want to point out, life isn't going the way you're going, isn't the way you're thinking, you're having a bad relationship with God, things don't seem to be really right, things aren't jiving well with you right now, you're really wondering what's going on. How do you treat your wife? How do you treat your wife? I think it's noteworthy right here. It says, so that nothing will hinder your prayers. I think it's noteworthy that we recognize the significance of the weight, the gravity of the thing that is being put here on husbands. How you treat your wives has a direct correlation to your relationship to God. Right? Paul tells us later on, he says, look, how you treat your wife, treat your wife as you would the Lord. We read in Proverbs 31, of course, that a good wife is as precious as the rarest rubies. We need to be considerate of that. And I know what most men are thinking. I am. Are you? Because let me tell you, after you come home and you've been working a long day and you're not really thinking, you're just like, oh, I want to relax, I want to do nothing, I want to just chill, and Rebecca always lets me know, I've been so busy, I've done this, and it's like, yes, I know, and I try and help out, and I try and do things that I can to help her out, because, I want to consider who she is and how precious she is. I want to recognize and appreciate her for who she is, and the fact that she's dedicated herself to God, and I appreciate that, and I want to treat her with respect. And by the way, If you have an issue, can you go back to it's on verse 7. It's probably the first bit. Oh, the next little bit. If you have an issue with the weaker partner issue, you see that? The weaker partner. Depending on which version you have, it might say weaker vessel, weaker... Okay. If I have to go through the physical differences between men and women, that men are just physically bigger and stronger, then I'm wasting my breath, okay? Like this is it's just known, okay? It's been known for all of time. Yeah, but what about the exceptions? They're called exceptions. Right? The whole point is, as a rule, we know that men and women are very different. Men tend to be larger and stronger. Women, of course, are smaller and weaker, but as a result, they can also have babies, so it's pretty important. But the whole point is we need to recognize and treat them with respect. Why? Because in the time that Peter's writing this, remember, the world is a wild place still. It's probably the safest time that it had ever been up until that time. Why? Because Roman soldiers patrolled the roads, and so you typically weren't, waylaid when you're trying to travel on the road as much. But it still happened. I mean, the fact that Jesus shared the story of the Good Samaritan, and no one was shocked about the brigands on the road. They were more shocked that the people would walk by, right? Or that the Samaritan would stop. Like, that was the shocking detail. Not that people got attacked, but that someone would help, right? That was what was shocking. Right? That is what we're also called to as men. We are called to be there, to protect our wives, to defend our wives, because guess what? If there is something that you value, something that you treasure, something that you hold oh so dear, are you going to allow anyone to try and take that from you? I mean, I know guys that treat their cars with more reverence and respect than they treat their wives. They would much easier let go of their wife than they would let go of a car. But how much more of a treasure is your wife? Don't worry. For people, so I think for anyone that's been married for any sort of length of time, like a lot of this is making sense. You're going, yeah, I get it. For people that are single, if you haven't yet got married and you're wondering, especially for ladies, because ladies, I feel like the charge that is given to you here, it's one of the more significant ones. It really stands out. Especially, it's very, very countercultural to what our culture would say today. It's saying, look, you need to submit under your husband, and our culture is saying, no, you don't. You ain't owned by no man. It doesn't say you own them. It means that you're willingly agreeing to get into, and I remember every single wedding that I've ever performed, I always read the passage from Ephesians, because I tell brides and grooms the exact same thing. I said, look, if you do not trust your husband to have your very best interests at heart, that he's going to treasure you and seek out the very best for you, then you have no business getting married anyway. Right? The Bible tells us, don't be unequally yoked. Don't think you can change them into the person you want them to be. We are who we are. I speak here as a man. We are who we are, and this is who we're going to be. We just get bigger and rounder. That's about it. That's the change you can appreciate. Jordan isn't going to be skinny forever. I don't know about Brent. He's just resisting change. The point of this passage, the most important point I think that we can all walk away and take away from, is the importance, the significance of marriage and the impact it has on our lives, both as men and women, as husbands and wives. As husband, we've been called to a great duty and a great responsibility to honor, respect, treasure the gift that we have before us, the wives that we have. We need to take those vows seriously from our wedding days. Where when we say that we're going to join into a relationship with not only the woman, but also with God in this three-chord approach, we need to recognize that if we cause any sort of discordance in this braid, we're going to weaken the entire thing and destroy it. And women, as wives, you're called to submit to your husband, a man who should love and cherish you and honor you. And guess what? Sometimes we're jerks. But by your holy living, your purity, and your reverence to God, let that be the thing that honors God. Make yourself something of great worth in his sight. Don't worry about what the world would have you do or have you say or have you be. If you're a Christian, that means that you've said, God, I want to follow you. I want to do what you have me, what you would have me do. And guess what? That means we're all going to do it imperfectly. Not one of us is going to have a perfect marriage, but it means that we're all going to be willing to say, I'm sorry when we're wrong. And it all means that we're going to be able to take on the roles that we'd have. And by the way, I'm just going to address it real quick here at the end. If you're wondering, why does it say, wives, submit yourself to the husband? This literally goes back all the way to Genesis, when God first designed this and set this up. And if you're going to be a leader of anything, if you're going to have a relationship, if you're going to have anything, if you're going to have a leader, I was hoping to actually, I was trying to get it, but I messed it up. I was trying to get that clip from The Office where Oscar's making the joke about the fact that they have co-manager and co-manager in Michael and Jim. And they're like, yeah, what ship set sail without two captains? What country doesn't have two presidents? Where would we be without this? It's foolish. We know that one person ultimately has to make a decision. At the end of the day, it was God. And God said, this is how it's going to be. But it is a cooperative relationship. And if we can walk away from today, and we can take that with us as we go home, and we can allow it to enrich our relationships, our marriages, then guess what? Not only will your marriage, because many of us here are married to a spouse that is a believer, not only are we going to enrich that relationship, but people around you, your neighbors, begin to see that you're different too. You don't function like the Bundys from All in the Family. Wait, you have a good relationship of love and respect and mutual caring, and things get along well, and you're functional, and wow, this is fantastic. Where do you get this from? It's a witness to who God is, to his glory and his power, and the significance that he has in our lives. So before we go to a time of prayer and worship, a time of prayer and contemplation, meditation, thinking on the word that has been presented, right? Because again, and if you have an issue with this, take it up with Peter. Don't take it up with me. This is what he said, not me. I want to give us an opportunity to go to prayer and to offer up prayer requests and do these things, because prayer is important. And certainly one thing I'm definitely going to be praying for is for our relationships and our marriages, right? I want all of the marriages in this church to be strong. And for those that are seeking good relationships and good marriages, I want those ones, the future ones, to be strong. I want us all to have this God-ordained design on our lives.